stood before the palace gate, coughing into the grand torch. He wiped his lips free of the metallic black flecks. Sorry, Graham Newton. He paused to catch his breath and looked up at the roofline of the palace with its multitude of pipes spewing black grit into the air. I have an audience with the king. The guard on the other side wasn't amused by the loud choking burst that pummeled his ear. Braced as it was against the opposite end of the top tube, and he really didn't want to open the gate and let the black cloud inside the filtered air of the palace, but the sergeant was leaning over his shoulder. Don't get your gears in a bind, he growled, and pushed a series of buttons to release the seals. There was a piercing whistle, and somewhere deep in the ground beneath the heavy walls, giant cogs started to roll. The seal popped with a gushing sound, and the clean air streaked out as the gate slowly swung open. Graham hoisted the knapsack across one shoulder and slogged into the keep, while the disgruntled private coughed into the portable small door. The antechamber was full of petitioners, each distinguished by the quantity of dust on their clothes. The wealthiest carried personal smog masks, yet seemed somehow untouched by the ground outside. Even the lowest of them seemed clean in comparison to Graham. His clothes were so dirty they seemed to smoke in the palace of clean air, and his original skin color was lost in the smudge of coal, smoke, machinist oil, and metal dust. Although he had polished his goggles before jumping the train early that morning, the lenses were hazy and particular. He was a powerful looking man. But when the coughs bit him double, as they often did, he seemed small and fragile. His father had died. Younger than most from the cough. The doctor said he had a weak constitution. They warned Graham that if he had probably inherited it, but he didn't believe them. He had survived longer than most by smelting scavenged metal and forging everything himself. He thought it had kept him strong. By the time he was admitted to the court, he had worked himself into a good state of anxiety and his overalls got soggy. He bowed clumsily, nearly falling over, trying not to growl low enough. When he straightened, the king's secretary was standing directly before him, with an oily smile and an outstretched hand. The king didn't even look at him. My plans are for your grace. The secretary smiled retired. Give them to me and explain your project. If it merits his grace attention, I'll show you. The throne room felt suddenly cramped and stuffy. His dingy once-blue machinist overalls clung to his skin, pinching his private parts, and he got the urge to run. He started to cough, but managed to fight it. It's the blueprints for a new kind of machine, one that doesn't burn coal for fire, for power. The secretary smirked. What does it run on? Hydrogen. He carefully pulled the thin paper rolls from the bag and handed them over. Do you think you'll be interested? If it works, the secretary's disconcerting smile returned. We'll be in touch. Graham coughed and shuffled from one foot to another. There's something else, my lord. You see, I have a daughter. His eyes softened. She's a fierce coughing fit forced him to pause. When he wiped his mouth on the shore, there were streaks of red in the black streaks. I don't want her to. He tried to take a deep breath, and it was cut off by another volley of coughs. The plans work. I can show you a prototype at my workshop, and in exchange, he made a circling gesture with his right hand. I want his grace to employ her here, in this palace. The secretary's smile was gone now, replaced by a pinched expression. As I said, the court will consider it if it works. But sir, you don't understand. She's even more clever than me. Just like Rick, she developed a process to turn lead into gold. The secretary held sharply. As he was about to order the presumptuous clod thrown from the court, the king said softly, really, we should like to see it. Matilda crumpled to the floor at the sound of the boat clanking home. 100 lead bars rose in a pyramid over her. She was a clever mechanic, but as far as she knew, no one could change lead into gold. It was a pipe dream, and some considered the big pipe dream, but as far as she was concerned, it cracked. It couldn't be done. In the morning, the king would return, and the room would be exactly as it was now. The king's softly voiced ultimatum echoed in her head, and she knew she was going to die for her father's stupid lie. The more she thought about it, the worse she felt. As she was resigning herself to tears, the door opened, and a small mechanical man tottered in. Matilda wiped her nose on her sleeve. Snipping sound was loud. It was masterfully designed with a gentle central floor and a series of thin-gauge high-pressure hoses powering his movements. They traced the outline of his body in a patchwork of rotors and gyros, except for the hoses. He was made of a finer grade of steel than any she'd seen. Black smoke marched from his ears as he forced steam through a series of pipes in his throat. "Why are you crying, pretty lady?" The ventilators probably sucked the smoke away. She explained that she was locked in a room full of lead bars, and if she didn't somehow, magically, turn them into gold, she was going to be hung from the neck until dead. There was a grinding of gears as the machine moved coal from reservoir to pour. After a blast of steam, it asked, "And what will you give me if I do this impossible thing for you?" "My ring." The little machine whirred as his arm rose to take the glass ring from the expert's hand and place it in his mouth. "Don't look," it said, turning to the bars. The automaton screeched, and even though her eyes were covered, she saw flashes of light through her hands. There was a loud grinding noise and then a strange crackling that raised the hair all over her body. The room felt heavy with smoke, and Matilda lost consciousness. She woke to the sound of the bolt slamming back into the door. When she remembered herself and her predicament, she shivered. Then the door opened, and she saw the shining look on the king's face. It was as if his skin reflected the gold glow of the gold bars. The next night, he left 200 bars, and as soon as the door crashed shut, she sank to her knees. She'd been saved by one miracle. Surely there weren't any left for her. Then the door opened again, and the little machine streamed smoke into her cell. "Why are you crying, pretty lady?" She just gestured at the pyramid of lead bars. "His Grace wants more gold." "And what will you give me for this impossible thing?" My necklace." Then the whirring sound as he swallowed her simple copper necklace. Down to look. She measured her breath and tried to learn what she could, but there was even more smoke, and she passed out same as the night before. She woke to the king gently shaking her. He was so delighted, he exclaimed softly in her ear, "Do this once more tonight, and we'll choose you to be queen." That night she was too tired to feel anything when they closed her in the cell with 300 bars of lead. But when the little mechanical man appeared, she burst into tears. "Why are you crying, pretty lady?" "Because the king has asked for a final proof, and I have nothing left to trade." She couldn't keep her hands still. "Then promise me, should you become queen, that you will give me your firstborn child." This whistle demand stilled her fluttering head. "Have what?" She held her breath. Who knew if the king would even remember his offer? He didn't reward the first 2 miracles, but she felt certain that he wouldn't forget to string her up. There were worse things he could forget. She exhaled and nodded. She promised. When she woke the next morning, the king glowed together with the 300 gold bars, and so the machinist's daughter became queen. The day after the wedding, her father died. Somehow, her fear of the promise to the little machine joined with her grief, and after her father's death, she had his library moved to the palace. She studied everything, searching for the patterns that might unlock the secrets to build her own mechanical man. Certain she would soon have to face the consequences of her father's lie and her own rash oath, she hoped to offer a sentient machine child in lieu of her own. She never fully succeeded. It was simple enough to make a machine walk down the hall, and she invented a computational engine composed of tiny mercury filled tubes, which allowed the device to be programmed with instructions led by small spools of punch tape. Using the auto-scroll as a model, it was easy enough for the machine to also record what it saw or heard, but she couldn't get it to access that information without being ordered to. So it couldn't become self-aware and make choices. It was also too big. By the time the palace was preparing to celebrate the royal birth, she had succeeded in a couple of innovations, but together amused the court and disturbed the servants. First, she solved the size problem by adapting her father's hydrogen engine so that the engine fit into the palm of her hand. The second invention was serendipity. She was perusing her father's outer-scroll archives when she stumbled on a study. Animal models for steam-powered automatons by Magnus Z the Younger. It was more than 100 years old, and there were images of creatures no one she knew had ever seen. It included schematics for several models of movement, including one with wings. Magnus described it as a dragonfly, and it sparked Matilda's imagination. She built a small host of dragonflies, refining the basic programming, navigation, and optics with each one. A year after the wedding, she gave birth to a beautiful baby girl, and she dreaded her debt to the little machine. She was trying to recreate the ingenious brain, and based on the dragonfly research, making progress she thought. But then he was in her workshop, puffing smoke circles from his ears and piping, "Now, give me what you promised." When the queen covered her mouth with a hand and said nothing, the little machine repeated, "Now give me what you promised." He dedicated herself to giving consciousness, but he just shook his head. She offered all the riches of the kingdom, lordship over lands of his own, a team of machinists and resources for his research, but the little machine refused whistling, "Something alive, something alive. It's dearer to me than all the treasures in the world." The queen stopped breathing for a minute, and then she wept, as she might drown in her own tears. There are some who say the little machine pitied her. It said, "I will give you 3 days, and if you can discover my name, then you shall keep the child." She sent out agents and programmed her dragonflies to search for the machine. She stayed up all night, filling an autopress scroll with names. When the little machine appeared in the morning, she began with Cassie, Melchior, Balthazar. She read through the entire auto scroll, but each time the machine said, "That's not my name." On the second day, she tried the most unusual and curious names from her agents. "Perhaps your name is Man-Ekin, or Automan, or AIU." But each time the little machine said, "That's not my name." On the third day, a dragonfly returned with an interesting spool of punch tape. Once loaded and queued into her personally modified autoscroll, the image opened on the Warrens district, with several bands of scavengers trading pot shops in the distance. Behind the collapsed factory, what used to be a public square had been cleared of debris and set up with an awning and a burning forge. In circles around the Lambo, a strays of the metal man seemed to be chanting as he hammered. There was an auto capture. She stoked the ball and then grabbed a second spool and fed it into the autoscroll. Blow, forge, strike, steel, body, but brain and bone. I will, a child just like a Z1. When the little man arrived and asked, "Now, my queen, what's my name?" At first she said, "Conrad? No. Is your name Scrappy? No." She shook her head and pursed her lips. "Perhaps your name is Z1. Z1 let out a great gout of steam, and as his gizmos whizzed and clinked violently, How could you? How could you?" His processors would gear so fast, his boiler overheated, and when he stopped his foot, the force drove it straight into the flagstone. He screeched a wild whistle and yanked at his other leg with his arm. He pulled so hard, he ripped himself to pieces.